Okay, so picking up right where we left off, I want to first address the mistake that I made in the middle of the last video, and then we can proceed from there. Typically, when I make a really bad mistake, I will edit it out and just fix it. Having said that, this is really a teachable moment because there is a temptation to think of angle and rotation as being synonymous, but they actually perform two different functions. So there is a command called Euler angles, and what that does is that sets to a certain angle. Rotation takes the current angle and modifies it. So at very best, this is redundant because we don't need to look at the current rotation because by default, that's what this is already doing. It's looking at the current rotation and then making a change. So really all you should have to do is that. And again, it's an embarrassing mistake because I personally always complain when it seems like as if some developers make things overly complex, whether intentionally, accidentally, whatever, and I found myself guilty of doing the same thing. So let's run this and you should see that it should work just as well. So I'm going to press A. As you can see, it still works. So we're going to press space. This one works just fine too. Go to the scene. As you can see, no difference. So, again, my apologies for making that overly complex. I really don't like making mistakes that early in a series, but I think it's a great teachable moment, and that is differentiating between angle and rotation, that there's a temptation to see them as synonymous, and they're not. That when you're declaring an angle, you're saying simply set it to a certain degree, 20 degrees, 45 degrees, whatever. Whereas rotate is saying, okay, take that and modify it. So there is a difference. So I guess in summary, I'd say that this is a relative change. So take the current rotation, take the current angle and make this change to it. So relative to the current angle, whereas the command Euler angles just sets it to a certain angle. Regardless of what it's already at, it simply sets it to an absolute value. Okay, so now that we've gotten past that mistake, let's move on. Oh, by the way, we will need this. We just didn't need it yet. So here's what we're going to do now. We want to be able to change what the surface of this is. So we're going to come down here to the wall prefab, and what we're going to do is we're going to delete this one in a few minutes, and we're going to bring this one up and get rid of that one. We're going to constantly put a new one in the scene. And then, as I said, eventually there won't be one in the scene to begin with, but we can go a little bit further before we get to that point. So what we want is we want this object to be aware of these images. Well, the images themselves aren't really useful. What you have to do is you have to make materials. So right-click down here, choose Create, and choose Material. We'll call this Metal Mat, although if you have a very large game, there might be hundreds of metal materials, so as far as the naming convention, not that great, but in the context of this project, it's sufficient. So what we do is we're going to declare that this is the image that we want to use for this material. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing for the other ones. So create material. We'll call this stone underscore mat. We'll put that up there. So I'm just dragging and dropping. And now, if you notice, I'm really not talking about any of the other settings. We can get to them later, but I'm not particularly concerned at the moment. Again, we're trying to do the basics, so it's not about having high resolution, high fidelity materials. It's about the ability to swap between them. Okay, so we now have these materials. We need this object to be aware of them. So again, the wall_con script is attached to that object. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify that object by adding more variables. This time will be for the materials. So public material, and then one for each. Public material, metal underscore mat, wood underscore mat, public material, and stone. Kind of did these out of order. Save. And watch what happens. Both this one and the prefab will be modified. So there's the materials. So metal material will go there. Stone material will go there. Wood material will go there. Technically, I could have just done that to the prefab and then replaced that one, but we'll get to that later. So metal, stone, wood. So this object, as well as its corresponding prefab, are now aware, for want of a better term, of those materials. So to set one of these materials as the default material, what you can do is you just click and drag one, and put it right on there. And I will run it. You can see it now as a material. We're kind of far away, so let's actually move the camera in. So let's move it down a little bit and towards it a little bit, and that'll make it a little bit more like Fortnite. As far as right now, it's kind of far away, and you're not that far away in the game. You can see the little preview here. It's about centered. And now what we'll do is we'll just delete the wall prefab. Recreate it just by dragging it from here into there. And what we need to do is we just need to link the prefab to itself, as well as linking the prefab to the one that's in the scene. Eventually, it'll be easier once this one is gone, but as you can see, it's easy to modify this and then just bring it down here rather than trying to mess with this one down here. You can make changes to prefabs. It's just some of the visual tools are easier. The drag and drop functionality is easier. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, and now we will go to Window, go to Scene. There you go. Nice little box. Now that we have that, really all that's left is to be able to cycle through the individual materials. In other words, what is the current material? And that's really, really easy. So again, we have our script, the wall_con script, and what we need to do is we need to check for the click of a button. So again, I'll do a video, a couple videos from now that has the alternate control scheme using the game controller, because I'm trying to think if it's I think it might be the left and right bumper is used to cycle through the various materials. So for our purposes, if we want to cycle, so let's use the keys 1, 2, and 3. So if input dot get key down. And again, we're using get key down and not just get key because get key is true for every single frame that the button is pressed. Get key down is true for just one frame. So again, get key would be if you're looking for a rapid fire scenario. And we'll put in the number 1. And despite what I said about testing a key press, I actually already tested that between videos, so I know this will work. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the material. So get component, what component, renderer. And we're going to have to make a change to this in just a moment. But I want to type this out to explain why. Material, and then what material? So one is going to be wood. So wood mat. Okay, so when you see this, if you haven't watched any of my other videos, what get component does is get component does just as the name would suggest. It's getting one of the components, and again, as a reminder, these are called components. See how it says add component? It's not a coincidence. This is a component. This is a component. This is a component. What this is saying is get a component. Which one? The renderer, okay? And what are you going to change? You're going to change the material, and then we're going to set it to that material. So pretty straightforward. You're just drilling down from the general to the specific. The problem is this script is attached to that object, which is basically an empty object that has no renderer. This has the renderer. So that means we need to change this object. So even though this object is attached to this, it's not really aware of it. So this inherits the rotation and scaling and things like that, but the wall object really isn't aware, for a better term. So what we have to do is we have to create a variable that references the cube, and then we can preface this with that. So let's see how that would look. So public transform. Oops, sorry, that's a T. And we'll call this just cube underscore obj. Let's save it. There it is. We take the cube, put it there, and now we preface this with that. So cube obj dot get component. So in other words, if this wasn't here, this gets the component of the object the script is attached to. You're saying, no, we don't want to do that. We want to get a component of the cube object, and the cube object is this. So that in and of itself shouldn't do anything because it defaults to wood. I did that kind of quick. I just copied and pasted. Again, I do that, A, because I'm lazy, B, because I want to reiterate that once you've typed this out, you're just going to rinse and repeat. You don't have to rethink this per se. Don't see this as another set of code. It's this same functionality just being repurposed. So we're checking for the number 2, and this will be stone mat. And then this is number 3. And this will be metal, and I think that's actually an uppercase M because I made a typo. Yeah, that one has a capital M. Sorry I didn't catch that earlier. All right, so I think that should do it. Okay, brief splice there because I ran it. I got a couple errors, and I decided to, in this case, backtrack to figure out what went wrong. So, first of all, for some reason, the metal mat was missing on the wall object, specifically the prefab. I'm not sure how that happened. Maybe I missed it earlier or I accidentally undid it. But make sure metal mat is there. Second of all, the cube object, just as this wall object is aware of this wall object needs to be aware of this cube. So there's that. And then the final thing is that right now, just as we locked out the rotation based on this value, we need to also lock out the changing of the material. So we should be able to do it the same way. We should be able to just append this to these. Now we do have to add a parenthesis in the beginning. So again, this is checking to see if that value is not equal to that, that variable is not equal to that value. Now we run it. So we rotate, great, press 1, nothing happens because it's already wood. Press 2, changes to stone, 3, changes to metal. Now let's hit the space to set, and that one is wood. Let's change it to 2 for stone. Let's set that one. We'll make that one wood, and we'll make that one wood. And now we'll come up here to window, into scene, just so we can get a bird's eye view. And there you go. You can see that you have made an object out of multiple materials. Now that's just the visual. And again, it doesn't look impressive because this is, once again, the graphics are placeholder. When you get your final version, you're going to create particle systems and assembling objects and things like that. You're not going to just use a flat image, a single flat object. You could if you want to, and there's nothing wrong with that. It all depends what you're looking for. This would have a very kind of cardboard cutout look, and maybe that's what you want. Again, this is the introductory. This is the primer to get you to do what, to show you how to do this. And that's actually, again, other than the visual flair, that's a good part of the basic assembly. You can rotate the piece, and technically that's more versatile than Fortnite, because in Fortnite, to the best of my knowledge, you can't rotate the piece. You actually have to move your character around to face the direction. So in some ways, at least at the moment, this seems more versatile. We'll have to see as we develop. And no matter how well you plan something out, you're going to eventually hit a roadblock that you didn't foresee, and you're probably going to have to make a change. But so far, this gets you a good deal of the way towards where you want to be. And the final thing that we'll add, even though it doesn't, it's not really anything we can check functionally now, and that's HP. So public, and we will use float so it can use decimals. Public float, and we'll call this wall HP, and by default it'll be set to, actually since by default it's wood, we'll set it at 100. And so what happens is, just as you change what it looks like, you change the hit points as well. So wall HP equals 100. Wall HP equals 200. Wall HP equals 300. And we already made sure that this is only changed if place status has not been set equal to set. So what we're going to do is, like I said, there's really nothing functional we can do this yet. We could display it in the debug log. That's about it. So let's do that. So when you press space, debug.log, and this is what I was saying about earlier, where you don't have to just put a string here. You don't have to put a constant. You can put a variable in. And so in this case, we'll put in the wall HP. Actually, let's back up for a second. This is what I'm talking about when I say about how important the suffix is when you're really, maybe I shouldn't say a suffix, but when you append a few letters at the end. By looking at this, I can tell you what those three objects, those three references are. The top one is the script, wall con. The middle one is the HP, wall HP, and the bottom one is the actual wall object. See how common they are, though, because I used the word wall 3 times already, and we're only in the very beginning stages of this game. So it's very important to come up with a naming convention that assists you. Can you imagine if there's 100 different variables with the word wall in it? So let's change it to stone. It's 200 points. Let's rotate 1 and leave it as wood. 100 points. Let's change this one to metal. It still said 100 points. Did I make a... No, 300 did display. Not sure why it didn't show up on the bottom. I'm seeing hundreds in the middle as well. I'm thinking that's just the debug, the way it's displaying the value, so I'm not concerned about it at this moment. We could test it when it comes to collisions. We're not quite there yet, so we have the ability to make 3 different types. We can make a wall. It can have 3 different types of material. There's a couple ways we can go now. We can put, say, the beginning of an inventory where you can only make it based on if you have sufficient units of, say, stone, wood, or metal. So that's one direction that we could go. Or we can build on what we got here already, no pun intended, and look at ceilings and floors and modifying the object. Modifying, I think, should be way down the line, because at that point we basically have to, you kind of break what you do, that the wall would be a placeholder image, and then say you blank out one corner of it, then a new object gets instantiated. So that is much more complex. We'd have to have many more resources to actually do that. So I'm thinking that we will do the beginnings of an inventory. It won't be like an inventory system per se. You'll just have 3 values: wood, stone, and metal. And we'll change the values to demonstrate whether or not you have sufficient resources to make that type of wall. And the other thing is we can test the hit points. I can do something very simple, like hit a button and a rock shoots out and does damage to the wall, and that way you can test to make sure that the wall has the right amount of hit points. Because displays don't really necessarily do anything. You actually need an event and have the event be triggered when the wall hits 0. And that's really the only way that you know. Okay, so that should do it for now. If you have any questions, just let me know.